Marcus Chen had always believed that Tuesday mornings on mining station Kepler 442b were supposed to be boring. The routine maintenance checks, the endless paperwork, and the quiet hum of the atmospheric processors usually made for a predictable start to the week. As the station's chief engineer, he preferred it that way. Predictable meant safe, and safe meant everyone went home to their families. But this Tuesday morning shattered every expectation he'd ever held about the universe. The first sign of trouble came through the emergency broadcast system. The piercing alarm that cut through the station's ambient noise made Marcus drop his coffee mug, sending the hot liquid splashing across his workstation. Emergency broadcasts were rare on Kepler 442b. The mining station orbited a planet so remote that even pirates considered it too much effort to raid. "All personnel, this is Commander Walsh," the voice crackled through the intercom. "We have multiple unidentified vessels approaching our position. This is not a drill. Report to emergency stations immediately." Marcus grabbed his emergency toolkit and ran toward the main corridor. Through the observation windows, he could see ships unlike anything in the human fleet approaching the station. They moved with an organic fluidity that made his stomach turn. The vessels seemed to pulse and shift, as if they were alive rather than constructed. The Zephyrian refugee ship had arrived 3 days earlier, carrying survivors from a world that had been glassed by an unknown enemy. The diplomatic corps had been excited about first contact with a new alien species, but Marcus had been more concerned with the practical matters of housing and feeding the refugees while keeping the station operational. Now he understood why the Zephyrians had looked so terrified when they'd arrived. The station shuddered as the first energy blast struck the outer hull. Emergency lighting bathed everything in an ominous red glow, and Marcus could hear the groaning of stressed metal throughout the structure. He reached the main corridor just as panicked civilians began streaming past him, heading for the evacuation pods. That's when he saw her. A small Zephyrian child, no more than 8 years old by human standards, stood frozen in the middle of the corridor. Her large, opalescent eyes were wide with terror, and her delicate, crystalline skin shimmered with what Marcus had learned was a stress response in her species. She clutched a small device that looked like a toy, but Marcus could see the way her fingers traced patterns on its surface with desperate precision. The other refugees had swept past her in their panic, either not seeing her or too frightened to stop. Marcus understood the feeling. The approaching enemy had destroyed her world, killed her family, and now they'd found her here. For a child who had already lost everything, this must seem like the universe's cruel joke. Marcus knelt beside her, speaking in the simple phrases he'd learned from the translation software. "Come with me. Safe place." She looked up at him with those enormous eyes and said something in her musical language that the translator rendered as, "They killed my parents. They killed everyone." "Not everyone," Marcus replied, extending his hand. "You're still here." Before she could respond, the station shook again, more violently this time. Through the transparent aluminum windows, Marcus could see one of the alien attackers moving closer. The ship was massive, easily 10 times the size of their largest mining vessel, and covered in what looked like organic armor plating. Weapon ports along its hull glowed with a sickly green light. The child looked toward the window and made a sound that needed no translation. It was the sound of absolute terror. Marcus scooped her up without hesitation, feeling how light she was in the station's artificial gravity. Her skin felt warm through his work uniform, and he could feel her rapid heartbeat against his chest. "We're going to the emergency shelter," he told her, though he wasn't sure she understood. They made it halfway to the nearest shelter when the corridor exploded around them. The blast came from above, tearing through the station's hull like paper. Debris rained down as atmosphere vented into space, and Marcus could see stars through the gaping hole where the ceiling had been. Emergency bulkheads began sealing automatically, but they wouldn't be fast enough. Marcus looked down at the child in his arms and made a decision that would change everything. Instead of continuing toward the shelter, he turned toward the blast. The child would be sucked into space in seconds unless something blocked the decompression. There wasn't time to think about the physics or the probability of survival. There was only time to act. Marcus threw himself between the child and the vacuum of space, using his body as a shield against the explosive decompression. He felt the violent pull of escaping atmosphere trying to tear him apart, felt his lungs burning as the pressure differential threatened to turn his blood to foam. Then something impossible happened. The moment Marcus committed himself to shielding the child, reality seemed to pause. He felt a warmth spreading through his body, starting from his chest and radiating outward. The painful pull of decompression faded, replaced by a sensation he could only describe as being embraced by starlight. When the warmth reached his skin, it began to solidify. Marcus watched in amazement as his work uniform dissolved, replaced by something that looked like liquid metal flowing across his body. The material moved with purpose, forming plates and joints with impossible precision. Within seconds, he was encased in armor that felt both alien and perfectly natural, as if it had been waiting his entire life to find him. The armor wasn't just protective, it was alive. Marcus could feel its consciousness touching his mind, not invasive but welcoming, like meeting an old friend after years apart. Information flowed through the connection, too fast and complex for his human brain to process completely, but he caught fragments. Images of great battles fought among the stars, civilizations rising and falling, heroes who had worn this armor across millennia, each one chosen for a single defining moment of selfless courage. The child in his arms was safe now, protected by an energy field that the armor generated effortlessly. Through his enhanced vision, Marcus could see that the attacking ships had stopped firing at the station. They hung motionless in space as if waiting for something. Then he heard the voice in his mind, speaking in a language older than human civilization, but somehow perfectly clear. "Guardian," the armor said, "you have been chosen." Through the hole in the station's hull, Marcus could see one of the attacking ships changing course. It was heading directly for their position, and weapon systems along its hull were powering up for what looked like a targeted strike. The aliens had detected the armor's activation, and they clearly considered it a threat worth eliminating immediately. Marcus set the child down gently, making sure she was behind him and protected by the energy field. "Stay close to me," he told her, surprised by how calm his voice sounded. The armor was affecting his mental state somehow, giving him a confidence he'd never possessed before. The attacking ship fired. The plasma blast that erupted from its main cannon could have vaporized a city block. It struck Marcus squarely in the chest with enough force to level a building. The impact should have reduced him to constituent atoms scattered across several cubic miles of space. Instead, Marcus absorbed it. The armor's chest plate blazed with captured energy, converting the destructive force into something useful. Marcus could feel power flowing through systems he was only beginning to understand, preparing weapons and defenses that seemed pulled from humanity's wildest dreams. But the most amazing thing was how natural it all felt. Marcus raised his right hand toward the attacking ship, and a weapon system he'd never seen before materialized around his forearm. It looked like a combination of human engineering and something far more advanced, with crystalline components that hummed with barely contained energy. When he fired, the beam that emerged was unlike any human weapon. It wasn't merely destructive, it was surgical, precise, designed to disable rather than destroy. The beam struck the attacking ship's weapon systems, overloading them in a cascade of feedback that left the vessel powerless but intact. The other attacking ships immediately began retreating, accelerating away from the station with obvious panic. Whatever they had expected to find here, it wasn't a human wearing Guardian armor. Marcus turned back to the child, who was staring at him with wonder instead of fear. She said something in her musical language that the armor translated directly into his mind. "You're like the stories my grandmother told me, the ones about the guardians who protected the innocent among the stars." "I'm just an engineer," Marcus replied, though even as he said it, he knew it was no longer entirely true. The armor's consciousness touched his mind again, sharing more information. The Guardians were ancient, older than any current civilization. They had once maintained peace across thousands of worlds, chosen not for their strength or intelligence, but for their willingness to sacrifice themselves for others. They had disappeared millennia ago, and with them, the stability they had provided. Wars had raged across the galaxy. Entire species had been driven to extinction. The universe had become a darker, more dangerous place, but the armor remained, hidden and waiting, choosing new guardians when the need arose. Marcus looked out at the stars through the hole in the station's hull, feeling the weight of impossible responsibility settling on his shoulders. The armor showed him glimpses of the galaxy's current state through its vast network of sensors and information systems. Wars raged on hundreds of worlds. Innocent civilians died by the millions, while tyrants and warlords carved up territory like children dividing toys. And somewhere out there, more of the attacking ships were gathering. The species that had destroyed the Zephyrian homeworld was part of something larger, something that viewed other intelligent life as nothing more than obstacles to be removed. The child tugged at his armored hand, bringing his attention back to the present. "Are you going to save everyone?" she asked. Marcus knelt beside her again, the armor adjusting automatically to make the movement fluid and natural. "I'm going to try," he said, "but I'm still just one person." "My grandmother said the Guardians were never alone," the child replied. "She said they found others who wanted to help, and together they made the darkness go away." Through the armor's enhanced senses, Marcus could hear the evacuation pods launching from the station. Commander Walsh's voice echoed through the emergency systems, organizing the evacuation with military precision. Most of the station's population would survive thanks to the brief reprieve his appearance had provided. But this was just the beginning. The armor shared more visions with him, showing the scope of the threat they faced. The attackers called themselves the Collective, and they viewed individual consciousness as a disease to be cured. They had been expanding across the galaxy for centuries, absorbing or destroying every civilization they encountered. The Zephyrians had been just their latest victims, and now they knew that a guardian had awakened. Marcus stood, feeling the armor systems coming online around him. Weapons, shields, sensors, and capabilities he couldn't even begin to understand were at his disposal. But more important than any of that was the connection he felt to something larger than himself. The armor carried the memories and experiences of every guardian who had worn it, and their collective wisdom whispered guidance in his mind. "We need to get you somewhere safe," Marcus told the child. "Then I need to figure out how to stop a galactic war." The child smiled for the first time since he'd met. The refugee transport ship Harmony's Edge drifted through space like a broken promise, its hull scarred by the same weapons that had destroyed dozens of worlds. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood on the bridge, watching the tactical display with growing dread. 3 weeks had passed since the attack on mining station Kepler 442b, and the Collective's advance had accelerated beyond all projections. "Captain," her communications officer called out, "we're receiving another distress signal. It's the colony ship New Brisbane about 6 hours away at maximum burn." Elena closed her eyes, feeling the weight of impossible decisions. The Harmony's Edge was already carrying 12,000 refugees from 7 different species, all fleeing the Collective's relentless expansion. Her ship was designed to carry half that number in comfort. With current overcrowding, life support was stretched to its limits, and food supplies would last maybe another week. But the alternative was leaving 30,000 colonists to face the collective alone. "Set course for New Brisbane," Elena ordered, "and pray we find some way to fit everyone." As her ship changed course, Elena found herself thinking about the reports that had been filtering through refugee channels. Stories about a human who had somehow acquired Guardian armor, who had single-handedly held off an entire collective assault force. Most of the command staff dismissed the reports as wishful thinking, the kind of legends that desperate people created when reality became unbearable. But Elena had seen the sensor recordings from Kepler 442b. She'd watched a human engineer absorb a plasma blast that should have vaporized him, then disable a collective dreadnought with a single shot. Whatever Marcus Chen had become, he was real. The question was whether one Guardian would be enough to turn the tide of a galactic war. Meanwhile, 3 star systems away, Dr. Sarah Kim was running out of time and options. The research station, Prometheus, hung in orbit around a dead world, its laboratories filled with the most brilliant xenobiologists, physicists, and engineers that the Allied Species Council could gather. Their mission was simple in concept, impossible in practice: find a way to stop the collective's conversion process. Sarah stared at the biological samples under her microscope, watching collective nanites convert organic tissue into something mechanical and cold. The process was elegant in its horror, rewriting DNA at the quantum level to create beings that were technically alive but utterly without individual will. "Any progress?" asked Dr. Velasque, her Altarian colleague. The tall, blue-skinned scientist's frilled head crest showed the colors of deep concern. "I think I understand how they do it," Sarah replied. "But understanding isn't the same as stopping it. The nanites are using quantum entanglement to rewrite biological structures faster than any known process. It's like they're borrowing processing power from across multiple dimensions." Through the laboratory's observation windows, Sarah could see the patrol ships that guarded the research station. They were good ships with skilled crews, but everyone knew they wouldn't last long against a serious collective assault. The station's only real protection was its location in a system that the collective hadn't yet targeted. That protection wouldn't last much longer. Sarah's console chimed with an incoming priority message. The transmission was heavily encrypted, routing through dozens of relay points to avoid detection. When she decoded it, the message was simple but extraordinary. "Guardian armor activated. Wearer seeks scientific consultation. Rendezvous coordinates attached. Monsieur Chen." Sarah stared at the message, her heart racing. The Guardian rumors were true, and he was reaching out for help. But the coordinates placed the rendezvous point deep in contested space, where collective forces were known to patrol. "Velasque," she called to her colleague, "how do you feel about taking a very dangerous field trip?" On the bridge of the Harmony's edge, Captain Elena Rodriguez was learning that the rumors about Guardian abilities had actually understated the situation. The ship that appeared alongside her vessel didn't match any known design in the database. It was sleek and organic-looking, with hull plates that seemed to shift and flow like liquid metal. When it hailed the Harmony's edge, the communication came through channels that shouldn't have existed. "Captain Rodriguez, this is Marcus Chen," the voice said through perfectly clear audio. "I'm here to help with the evacuation." Elena stared at the tactical display in amazement. The unknown ship was roughly the size of a heavy cruiser, but sensor readings suggested it was far more advanced than anything in the human fleet. "Mr. Chen, I'm reading massive energy signatures from your vessel. What exactly are we looking at?" "Guardian technology," Marcus replied. "The armor doesn't just protect me, it can build things when they're needed. Right now, we need evacuation ships." What followed was the most extraordinary operation Elena had ever witnessed. The Guardian ship extended what looked like manufacturing pods from its hull, and within minutes they began producing smaller vessels. Not crude emergency pods, but fully functional transport ships with life support, navigation systems, and defensive capabilities. "This is impossible," Elena's chief engineer muttered as he watched the construction process through telescopic cameras. "Matter conversion on this scale shouldn't be possible. Where is he getting the raw materials?" "The armor interfaces with quantum foam," Marcus explained, apparently having heard the comment through enhanced sensors. "It can convert zero-point energy directly into matter. The manufacturing process is limited only by design templates and energy availability." Within 6 hours, Marcus had produced enough ships to evacuate not just New Brisbane, but 3 other colonies in the system. Each vessel was crewed by volunteers from the refugee population, people who had lost their homes but were determined to help others avoid the same fate. Elena found herself commanding an impromptu fleet of 47 ships, all following the Guardian vessel toward what Marcus claimed was a safe rendezvous point. It should have been chaos, but the Guardian's coordination was flawless. He seemed to be tracking every ship simultaneously, adjusting flight paths to avoid collective patrols with uncanny precision. "Captain," her navigator called out, "we're approaching the rendezvous coordinates. I'm reading multiple ships already in position." The sight that greeted them defied Elena's understanding of current galactic politics. Ships from dozens of species hung in space around what looked like a massive construction project. Human vessels worked alongside Altarian science ships and Zephyrian refugee transports. Even some species Elena didn't recognize were represented in the growing fleet. At the center of it all was a space station that clearly incorporated Guardian technology. Its hull showed the same flowing, organic appearance as Marcus's ship, but on a massive scale. Construction drones moved around it constantly, adding new modules and defensive systems. "Welcome to Haven Station," Marcus's voice said across all communication frequencies. "The first free port in Guardian space." Dr. Sarah Kim stood in Haven Station's main laboratory, feeling like she was working inside a dream. The research facilities that the Guardian technology had provided were beyond anything she'd imagined possible. Equipment that should have taken years to build had been fabricated in hours, and the station's quantum computers were running calculations faster than entire university networks. "The nanite samples you provided are fascinating," she told Marcus as they reviewed her preliminary findings. The Guardian stood nearby, his armor now configured for station environments. It had become sleeker, more refined, though still unmistakably powerful. "I think I can develop a countermeasure," Sarah continued, "but I'll need to understand more about how the armor interfaces with quantum structures. The collective's conversion process operates on similar principles to your matter fabrication." Marcus nodded, the armor's faceplate transparent enough to show his human features. "The armor's willing to share that information, but there's something you need to understand first. Guardian technology isn't just advanced. It's alive. Every system, every capability exists because of a symbiotic relationship between the wearer and the armor's consciousness." "Consciousness?" Sarah felt her scientific worldview shifting. "You're saying the armor is sentient?" "More than sentient," Marcus replied. "It's a collective intelligence built from the experiences of every Guardian who ever wore it. When I put it on, I became part of something that spans millions of years of galactic history." Sarah looked at the quantum resonance patterns on her displays, seeing them in a new light. "If the armor is truly conscious, then it might be able to teach other intelligences to resist the collective's conversion process. We wouldn't be building a weapon against their nanites. We'd be building an immune system." 3 days later, the first test of Sarah's theory took place in Haven Station's medical bay. The volunteer was a young Altarian named Korvat, who had been partially converted by collective nanites before escaping. The mechanical components in his nervous system should have made him a slave to the collective's will. But he'd managed to retain his personality through sheer determination. "The process might be painful," Sarah warned as she prepared the treatment. We're essentially asking your immune system to evolve in real time. Korvat's frilled head crest showed colors of determination. I've been in pain for months. If this can free others from what happened to me, it's worth the risk. The treatment involved injecting quantum-engineered antibodies derived from Guardian technology. Sarah watched the biomonitors nervously as the antibodies spread through Korvat's system, seeking out and neutralizing the collective nanites. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then Korvat began to convulse as his partially converted neural pathways fought against their mechanical restraints. The medical monitors showed neural activity unlike anything in the databases. Patterns that suggested consciousness and machinery were engaged in direct conflict. "It's working," Sarah whispered, watching as the collective nanites began to break down. His immune system is learning to recognize them as foreign invaders. When the process finished, Korvat sat up with tears streaming down his blue face. "I can think clearly for the first time in months," he said. "The voices in my head are gone." Word of the successful treatment spread through Haven Station like wildfire. Within hours, partially converted refugees from dozens of species were requesting the treatment. More importantly, Sarah's team was able to synthesize the quantum antibodies for mass production, but their celebration was short-lived. "Guardian," Haven Station's tactical officer announced. "We have massive collective formations approaching. Estimated time to contact, 4 hours." Marcus stood in the station's command center, watching the sensor displays with growing concern. The approaching force was unlike anything the collective had deployed before. Hundreds of ships in perfect formation, surrounding what looked like a mobile space station, larger than most moons. "That's a convergence engine," Marcus said, the armor's vast memory providing the identification. "The collective uses them to convert entire star systems in a matter of days. If it reaches populated space..." Elena Rodriguez, now serving as Haven Station's tactical coordinator, studied the projections. "How do we stop something that size?" "We don't," Marcus replied, "not with conventional weapons. But Guardian technology was designed specifically to counter collective expansion. The armor's been waiting thousands of years for this moment." Marcus felt the armor's consciousness reaching out through space, sending signals on frequencies that had been silent since the last Guardian War. If other armors still existed, if they sensed the approaching threat, they would respond. He just hoped they would respond in time. The quantum communication array that Sarah's team had built began receiving responses from across the galaxy. Signals from humans who had committed desperate acts of heroism and found themselves chosen by Guardian armor. A maintenance worker who had shielded a transport ship from Ast, the convergence engine emerged from quantum fold space like a wound in reality itself. The massive collective construct dwarfed everything around it, its biomechanical hull stretching for thousands of kilometers in every direction. Weapon ports along its surface numbered in the millions, and the energy readings coming from its core suggested it could crack planets with focused fire. Marcus Chen stood on Haven Station's command deck, feeling the weight of every decision that had led to this moment. Around him, the makeshift fleet of refugee ships and improvised warships looked pitifully small compared to the approaching threat. But appearances were deceiving. "Guardian Network Status Report," Marcus said, his enhanced consciousness reaching out across the galaxy. The responses came flooding back through quantum channels that the collective couldn't intercept. 12 new Guardians had awakened in the past week. Scattered across human space, each one had been chosen in a moment of desperate courage, just as Marcus had been. Each one now stood as humanity's representative in an ancient war. "All Guardians report ready," Marcus announced to the command crew. "Dr. Kim, what's the status on the immunity treatment?" Sarah looked up from her quantum biology displays, exhaustion clear on her face despite the excitement in her voice. "We've successfully treated over 3,000 partially converted refugees. The quantum antibodies are working beyond our wildest projections. More importantly, we've found a way to weaponize the immunity. She gestured to a display showing molecular diagrams that hurt to look at directly. Guardian technology can produce these antibodies as an aerosol. If we can get close enough to the convergence engine, we can literally infect it with freedom. Captain Elena Rodriguez studied the tactical projections with a mixture of hope and despair. Getting close enough is the problem. That thing has more firepower than the entire human fleet combined. Then we don't fight it like a fleet, Marcus replied. We fight it like guardians. The plan that Marcus outlined was either brilliant or suicidal, and possibly both. Instead of engaging the convergence engine directly, the Guardian network would coordinate simultaneous strikes across the galaxy. While the massive construct was focused on Haven Station, Guardian teams would attack collective control nodes on dozens of worlds. The collective operates through quantum-linked consciousness, Marcus explained. Every converted being is connected to their central intelligence through quantum entanglement. If we can disrupt enough control nodes simultaneously, we can create a cascade failure that will affect the convergence engine. Dr. Velasque, Sarah's Altarian colleague, raised a concern. The timing would have to be perfect. A few seconds of delay and the collective will adapt to our countermeasures. Leave the timing to us, Marcus said with quiet confidence. Guardian armor exists outside normal temporal flow during combat operations. We can coordinate across galactic distances with quantum precision. The first phase of the operation began when the convergence engine reached the edge of the system. Marcus watched through enhanced sensors as the massive construct deployed its conversion arrays, beginning the process that would transform every planet in the system into collective resources. That's when the Guardians struck. Across human space, 12 armored figures simultaneously appeared at collective facilities. The coordination was flawless. Each Guardian arriving at the precise moment needed to maximize the network disruption. They moved through collective defenses like forces of nature, Guardian technology adapting and evolving to counter every weapon system the enemy deployed. On Kepler 186F, Guardian Maria Santos, a former schoolteacher, walked through conversion facility barriers that should have been impenetrable. Her armor had learned to phase through solid matter, allowing her to reach the central processing core where thousands of captured humans were being slowly converted. The quantum antibodies she deployed spread through the facility's air systems, causing converted workers to collapse as their free will suddenly returned. On Proxima Centauri B, Guardian Chen Wei, a maintenance worker who had shielded a transport from asteroid debris, faced down an entire collective fleet. His armor had developed the ability to manipulate gravitational fields, and he used it to create a localized black hole that swallowed 3 dreadnoughts before the rest of the fleet retreated. On Ross 128B, Guardian Aisha Okafor, a farmer who had protected a refugee camp, discovered that her armor could interface directly with planetary ecosystems. The collective had turned the world's forests into biological processing centers, but Aisha's touch restored their natural functions. Trees that had been pumping out conversion nanites suddenly began producing quantum antibodies instead. Each successful strike sent cascading disruptions through the collective's network. The convergence engine, which had been methodically converting the outer planets of Marcus's system, began to show signs of instability. "It's working," Sarah reported from her monitoring station. "The quantum entanglement network is destabilizing. The collective's central intelligence is losing control of peripheral nodes." But the collective wasn't helpless. As the network disruption spread, the convergence engine began to adapt. Its massive bulk turned toward Haven Station, bringing weapons online that could have sterilized entire continents. "Guardian!" Elena called out. "It's targeting the station directly. Those weapon signatures are unlike anything in our databases." Marcus nodded, feeling the armor's ancient memory providing context. Quantum disintegration beams. They don't just destroy matter, they unravel it at the subatomic level. Nothing conventional can shield against them. So what do we do? Marcus smiled, feeling the collective consciousness of every Guardian who had ever lived flowing through his awareness. We do what Guardians have always done. We stand between the innocent and harm, no matter the cost. The armor began to change around him, flowing and reshaping itself in response to the threat they faced. Guardian technology had been designed specifically to counter collective weapons, but the energy requirements were enormous. What Marcus was about to attempt would require him to channel the combined power of the entire Guardian network. "All Guardians," Marcus broadcast across the quantum channels, "prepare for Unified Defense Protocol." The responses came back immediately, 12 voices speaking in perfect unison. "Ready, Marcus. Do what needs to be done." Marcus stepped off Haven Station and into space itself. The Guardian armor encased him in a protective field that allowed him to survive in vacuum, but more than that, it began to grow. Drawing energy from the quantum foam that permeated space-time, the armor expanded and multiplied until Marcus stood at the center of a defensive network that stretched across thousands of kilometers. When the convergence engine fired its planet-killing weapon, Marcus was ready. The quantum disintegration beam struck the Guardian shield network with enough force to unmake a star. But Guardian technology had been designed to face exactly this threat. Instead of trying to absorb or deflect the weapon, the armor network converted the beam's destructive energy into something constructive. Across the galaxy, every collective facility that hadn't yet been liberated suddenly found itself saturated with quantum antibodies. The conversion nanites that had enslaved billions of beings began breaking down, freeing their victims in a cascade of restored consciousness that spread faster than the collective's ability to counter it. The feedback effect was devastating to the collective's network. The convergence engine, suddenly cut off from billions of linked minds, began to shut down. Its massive hull went dark as the central intelligence that had controlled it for millennia finally succumbed to system overload. But Marcus had paid a price for the victory. When Sarah reached him in Haven Station's medical bay, the Guardian armor was barely maintaining his life signs. The energy required to channel the quantum disintegration beam had pushed both human and Guardian consciousness to their absolute limits. "Is he going to be okay?" asked the small Zephyrian child who had become something like the station's unofficial mascot. She clutched Marcus's armored hand with obvious concern. "I think so," Sarah replied, watching the biomonitors. "The armor is healing him at the cellular level, but it's going to take time." Through the medical bay's observation windows, they could see the aftermath of the battle. Collective ships throughout the system were powering down as their crews regained free will. Many of them immediately surrendered, their former victims eager to help others who had suffered under collective control. More importantly, quantum communication arrays were lighting up with reports from across the galaxy. The cascade failure had reached every collective facility, freeing billions of enslaved beings and effectively ending the threat of forced conversion. When Marcus finally opened his eyes 3 days later, the first thing he saw was the Zephyrian child's concerned face. "Did we win?" he asked weakly. "We won," she confirmed, her crystalline features shimmering with joy. "The bad people can't hurt anyone anymore." Marcus sat up slowly, feeling the armor adjusting to support him. Through its enhanced senses, he could perceive the fundamental changes that their victory had brought. The collective's quantum network was gone, replaced by something unprecedented in galactic history, a communication system that connected free worlds without compromising their independence. "The armor wants to tell you something," the child said, apparently able to sense the Guardian technology's consciousness in ways that amazed the scientists. Marcus felt the ancient intelligence touching his mind one more time, sharing a final revelation. The Guardian armor hadn't just been waiting for the collective to return. It had been waiting for a species that could truly understand the balance between individual freedom and collective responsibility. Humanity had passed that test. Over the following months, Haven Station grew into something resembling a galactic capital. Representatives from hundreds of worlds arrived to participate in the new government that was forming. For the first time in millennia, the galaxy had a chance at lasting peace. But Marcus knew that the real victory wasn't political or military. It was the simple fact that when innocent beings needed protection, people had been willing to sacrifice everything to provide it. The Guardian armor continued to seek out new wearers, but now its choices weren't limited to moments of crisis. Teachers who inspired their students, doctors who treated patients regardless of their ability to pay, engineers who designed safer systems even when it cost them profit, all found themselves chosen by ancient technology that recognized the heroic potential in everyday actions. Dr. Sarah Kim, now director of the Galactic Medical Initiative, stood in her laboratory watching the latest batch of quantum antibodies being prepared for distribution. The treatment that could free converted beings was now available on every world that wanted it, ensuring that forced assimilation would never again be possible. Captain Elena Rodriguez, appointed as the first human representative to the Galactic Council, worked tirelessly to establish trade routes and communication networks that would prevent any single species from becoming isolated enough to face extinction alone. And Marcus Chen, the engineer who had become something more, continued to serve as the Guardian Network's coordinator. But his favorite duty was still the simplest one, teaching young beings throughout the galaxy that anyone could be a hero, that the only qualification needed was the willingness to help others when they needed it most. The Zephyrian child, now adopted into Marcus's growing family of refugees who had become relatives, often asked him to tell the story of how the Guardians had saved everyone. Marcus always began the same way. It started with a choice. Someone decided that protecting others was more important than protecting themselves, and that choice echoed across the entire galaxy, proving that even in the darkest times, light will always find a way to shine. The universe was vast and full of dangers, but it was also full of beings willing to stand guard against the darkness. And as long as that remained true, the galaxy would never lack for heroes. In the end, humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their absolute refusal to let anyone face the darkness alone. That spirit, amplified by Guardian technology and shared across thousands of worlds, became the foundation upon which a better universe was built. The collective had sought to make everyone the same, to eliminate the chaos and unpredictability of individual consciousness. But they had never understood that diversity wasn't a weakness to be corrected. It was the source of innovation, creativity, and the kind of courage that could change everything. And sometimes, in the quiet moments between crises, Marcus would remember that Tuesday morning when he'd thought his biggest problem was spilled coffee. He'd learned that the universe had a way of testing everyone's character, usually when they least expected it. The armor whispered to him then, sharing the wisdom of countless guardians across the ages. Every moment was a chance to be better than you were before, and every choice to help others echoed through eternity. That was the real power of the Guardians. Not the technology or the weapons, but the simple, unshakable belief that everyone deserved protection, and that anyone could choose to provide it. Eroid impacts. A teacher who had protected her students during a pirate raid. A farmer who had stood between raiders and a refugee camp. One by one, new guardians were awakening across human space, and with each activation, the collective knowledge and power of the ancient protectors grew stronger. The final battle for the galaxy's future was about to begin, and humanity had just discovered that their greatest strength wasn't their technology or their tactics. It was their willingness to sacrifice everything for complete strangers at her, and Marcus realized that hope was the most powerful weapon in any Guardian's arsenal. No matter how dark the universe became, as long as someone was willing to stand between the innocent and harm, light would endure. The armor's communication systems were already reaching out across space, sending signals on frequencies that had been silent for thousands of years. If other potential Guardians existed, if others were willing to take the same leap of faith that Marcus had taken, they would hear the call, and perhaps, just perhaps, the galaxy would remember what it meant to have protectors among the stars.